Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Our guest today on the Published Author Podcast is John Warlow. John is the author of Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You, which is one of my favorite business books, actually. So I'm excited to talk to John just because of that. That book was recognized by Fortune and Inc. magazines as one of the best business books of 2011, and it's been translated now into 12 languages. In 2015, John published The Automatic Customer, Creating a Subscription Business in Any Industry, also a great book I've read. And his third and latest book, The Art of Selling Your Business, Winning Strategies, Secret Hacks for Exiting on Top, was published in January this year, 2021. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, Josh, good to be with you.
I'm excited to have you on here because I love your books. I've read your books before. And when your team reached out, I was like, heck yeah, let's get John on the show. This will be great.
That's awesome.
Before we dive into talking about your books, tell us a little bit more about your business and what you do and who you do it for.
Yeah, we help companies build and accelerate the value of their company leading up to an exit. I run a company called Value Builder, which is a software that effectively advisors use to market themselves and to add a value building practice to their firm. But it's kind of not where I started. I started, as you rightly point out, writing this book called Built to Sell, which was after I'd built up a couple of businesses and sold them and figured I'd learned a few things along the way.
So what were some of those businesses that you built up and sold before?
Yeah, I used to run a market research business. That's probably the one that inspired me to write Built to Sell. It was a classic services business where we had very big clients. We had, Bank of America was a client, American Express was a client, and we'd actually built it up to a reasonably good sized business. I think we were 5 or 6 million in revenue. We pretty profitable because each job was custom. So we were 20, 30% profit margins. And I went to see an M&A guy. And I said, what do you think it's worth? And I was kind of rubbing my hands together thinking it's going to be can't wait for the number. And he said, well, before I answer the question, let me ask you a couple of questions. And I said, sure. You're in the research business. So who does the research? And I was like, well, I'm involved in some of it. It's these big clients. Of course I'm involved. And he said, all right, well, who does the selling? And I'm like, it's Bank of America. Of course I've got to go show up to those meetings. And I'm involved in the selling. It's like, all right, so you got a research business. You do the research, you do the selling. Is that it? And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. He's like, well, there's nothing to sell here. I can't sell your company. It's worthless. And that for me was like getting kicked in the groin. It was brutal. And it really inspired this journey that I went on to try to understand what makes a business valuable. Ultimately, we transformed that company. We started focusing on one thing. We hired salespeople. We created recurring revenue subscription model, et cetera. It was acquired years later by a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange listed company. So it had a sort of happy ending, but it was that meeting that really inspired my journey to try to understand what drives the value of your company and ultimately inspired the book Built to Sell.
So did the inspiration or did the idea for that book come while you were still working for that company, or was it after you sold it that you had the idea of, hey, I really need to go write a book about this?
Yeah, it was after, and it wasn't, the book is not just about me and that business. It was really an amalgam of having been involved in a few businesses and made lots of mistakes, learned lots from lots of different mentors. So it's sort of a mashup of lots of different experiences. I was actually having lunch with a guy named Tom Deans. Tom wrote a self-published book, and my lawyer, we share the same lawyer, and my lawyer, after he knew I was not, I'd left the company that acquired mine. He's like, you should have lunch with Tom. And I had lunch with Tom, and he wrote a book called Every Family's Business, and he had been really successful with it, self-published, and done a bunch of speaking on the back of it. I said, you got to write a book. And I'm like, really? And so I remember leaving that lunch and I went up, because I'd sold my company. I didn't have a job to go to. I went to the third floor of our house and I just started writing this narrative. And if you've read Built to Sell, it's just it's a parable. It's a story, which is the best kind of book to write because you can make it all up. It's just so much better. My subsequent books have been nonfiction, effectively. So they require research and all the boring BS associated with actually writing a book. Built to Sell was fun because it was just stream of consciousness, making it up. And I'm actually going to write some fiction one day because I enjoyed it that much.
So you wrote that book. I mean, a lot of people have an idea that they say, hey, I've got something to share. But what was it that really pushed you over the edge that made you feel like I need to write this book, or this is worth all the time and effort? Because it's still a lot of work to write a book. What was it that was driving you through that process to say, I need to do this?
I mean, that gets into deep psychological, like I don't know that I'm qualified to answer. I guess in some level, I wished I had known what I wrote about. Like, I wish someone had sat me down and sort of given me a bit of a cheat sheet to all this stuff. And, I was always under the impression that like a business was valued based on its revenue, based on its client list, based on its sales, profitability, blah, blah, blah. And I was really quite floored to find out that that is important, but not necessarily the most important attributes that actually drive the value of your company. And so I guess on some level, I was writing something I wished I'd had, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And were you thinking about entrepreneurs as the audience for this? Like, was this kind of a, hey, I wish these other entrepreneurs out there knew this, or I know that they need to know this? And was that motivating you? Were you thinking about, you created a business kind of out of this book, right?
Yeah, that was not intentional though.
But that was not intentional.
That was almost by accident. So no, the books, The Automatic Customer and The Art of Selling Your Business, were very much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Much more thoughtful. They were intentional, meaning I then subsequently started a company and I thought those books could serve that business. Built to Sell was different. Built to Sell was sort of more of an emotional reaction. And it was a moment in time where I had time to sort of reflect. I was in a more reflective mood because I could, I had the time. I didn't have a business to go do. So I wrote that book, and our family, I made the decision with my wife, and we had two very young kids at the time. They've now since grown older, but they're very young. We moved to Europe. And we lived in Europe for 3 years. And if you ever want to know how to like totally screw up your book promotion, is to write a book and then go to like a little village in the south of France that's like a 2 flights, if not 3 flights from anywhere you want to speak. It's about the worst thing you can possibly do. So that's not what I would recommend. But it speaks to, I think, again, the book, I didn't write the book with the intention that it's going to be a lead gen, it's going to be a top of the funnel product for some course or some. That was not the intent. It turned out that when I was in Europe and I was sort of getting a little bit fidgety, wanting to do something, we had put together a questionnaire that. It was kind of like a men's health test. When you do those men's, like, what kind of lover are you? Or like, what kind of athlete are you? And you answer 10 questions and it says, oh, you're this, whatever. It was similar to that, except it was whether your business was sellable or not. And it was on the Built to Sell website. And we started getting calls from advisors, accounting firms, M&A firms saying, hey, could we license that questionnaire on your website for our website? Because we want to start a conversation with business owners, et cetera. Anyways, long story short, that triggered a light bulb for me to say, hey, why don't I build some tools for advisors to use? And that's what started Value Builder, which has evolved into a practice management software for advisors to use in their firms. And the subsequent books have really served that software company, but Built to Sell was a bit different.
Gotcha. So there's the story of where Value Builder came from. So then you've got Value Builder running and you thought, I need to write this other book, The Automatic Customer. What was the inspiration or motivation for that specific angle with that book?
Built to Sell talks really thematically about how do you create a business that's not dependent on you. But I had underestimated and given short shrift to this concept of recurring revenue. I just hadn't made it a big enough deal. And what I came to learn through doing some of the research for Value Builder is like recurring revenue is this incredible secret sauce for building a valuable company. And Built to Sell talked about creating a business that's not dependent on you, and it touched on recurring revenue, but I just felt like it didn't do enough to really drive home the point that if you don't have recurring revenue, it's going to be very difficult to create a sort of transferable value. And so that's what inspired the book. And it was a more intentional book, by at that time, Value Builder, the practice management software, existed. It was in its early days, but it certainly was there. And we thought, writing this book would help promote the software company. So there was more intention behind the automatic customer, both to sort of fix a problem that I thought existed in Built to Sell, but also really sort of help promote the software company.
And then the art of selling, where did that come in? Or the art of selling your business, rather. The art of selling your business, where did that come in? What was the inspiration behind that, or the motivation where you said, I need to write this book now?
So after Built to Sell, I started producing a podcast called Built to Sell Radio, where I interview a different entrepreneur every week and ask them about their exit. And so I've done that for something like 6 years now, since 2015. And what I came to learn was that most business owners I interviewed sold their business for an industry average multiple. Like if it was a lawn care company, it traded at 3 or 4 times EBITDA. If it was a manufacturing company, it might trade at 5 or 6 times EBITDA. Like those are pretty normal exits. There is a cohort of my guests on Built to Sell Radio that seemed to be playing by a completely different hymn book. Like they were trading at multiples of revenue, not multiples of earnings. Like they were having these incredible exits. And so I was just sort of fascinated by like, what are they doing differently than all the other folks? And so that's what I really wanted to dig in with the art of selling your business. Is the point of the book, and it's a bit of a frustration for me, but right now, valuation experts, people who value businesses sort of parade around as if there is some formula that values a company and that they are the ultimate arbiters of what a value, what a business is worth. And in reality, my experience is that the same business can be viewed very differently in terms of value by different acquirers. And so I wanted to write this book saying, like, there's an art to it. It's not just zeros and ones. It's not just Excel spreadsheets. There's a way you position your company. There's a way you market your business. There's a way you go about romancing the buyers so that it entices them into wanting to own your company. And that's not something you could put in a spreadsheet. And that's what I wanted to sort of try to communicate with this book.
Interesting. That explains the title. So going back to Built to Sell, that book's been translated into 12 languages. That doesn't happen unless a book's selling quite well. Did the success of that book surprise you? Yeah, I think it did, actually. I think every author would like to think, oh, they're going to get on a bestseller list or whatever. I do think it somewhat surprised me. I think what surprises me more is the longevity. Like, we had a good run in the first year it was published, but since then it has sold virtually the same number of copies every week within plus or minus 20% for almost 10 years. So it's one of those evergreen books, which for whatever reason just keeps selling, which that surprises me more. Like, if I look at the automatic customer by comparison, it had a more pointed peak of sales in the beginning, but then it's really tailed off, so that it's, the life, it's not as evergreen as Built to Sell. Built to Sell just continues to sort of truck along every week. It hasn't died off yet. I don't know if it will, but it hasn't yet. Whereas the automatic customer certainly has. Interesting. Do you have any ideas about why that is? What the reason is? I think it's just an evergreen topic. I think building a business that can thrive without you, so that you have all the kind of poker, the ultimate poker hand. You don't have to want to sell, but you could, if you wanted to, you could bring in management, et cetera. Like, that's a relatively timeless idea. It doesn't matter if you're starting a business in 2021 or 2011, like, it's the same idea. Whereas the automatic customer is about recurring revenue. And it's,
subscription business models were really a very big deal, say 7 or 8 years ago. Like everyone had a box. Remember all the boxes that we used to subscribe to, and Netflix was really gaining strength. We were still subscribing to cable at the time. iTunes, you could still download music and pay 99 cents a song before music, and Spotify. So like that was all, like the book was all around that transition. And so it's kind of done like that. Like I wouldn't say it's done. Like we've moved to the subscription economy. We're not moving, we've moved. It's past tense, it's happened. And so many of the things we buy now are subscription based.
Quick break here. Are you an entrepreneur? Do you want to write a book that will help you grow your business? Visit publishedauthor.com, where we have programs to fit every budget, programs that will help you write and publish your book in as little as 90 days, starting at just $39 per month. Or if you're too busy to write your book, we'll interview you and then write and publish your book for you. Don't let the valuable knowledge and experience you have go to waste. Head on over to publishedauthor.com to get the help you need to become a published author. You've already waited long enough. Do it today. Now, back to the show. We're talking about the success that you had there with Built to Sell, and then Automatic Customer kind of peaked and then dropped off. With Art of Selling Your Business, of course, this has just come out in January, right?
Yeah.
How's that doing so far?
It's doing well. I mean, it's a very small audience. And I pitched it to the publisher of Automatic Customer and Built to Sell. And they said, like, we're out. It's too small. And the reason for that is, if you think about the audience of people who are entrepreneurial, you've got 8 or 10% of the population in the United States that are thinking of starting a business, right? So there's 30 million people. And then on top of that, you've got about 30 million small businesses that are really self-employed individuals, less than 5 or 10 employees. So you've got another 30 million. So the audience is 60 million. So the dreamers and the kind of doers, the starters, right? But it's only 4% of all businesses that ever eclipse $1 million in annual sales. And so it's kind of a niche of a niche of a niche in terms of its audience. And I knew that going in, and that's okay, because the book, I think, will be really impactful. I hope it will be really impactful for a small number of people. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be a New York Times bestselling book, but I think it will serve for people who the audience is. It's those companies that have between 1 and 10 million in annual sales, of which there are only a few 100,000 in the United States. Those are the people I wrote that book for. And again, it's too nichey for a mainstream publisher. So we worked with Greenleaf on the last book, The Art of Selling Your Business. And that's been a great experience.
Gotcha. Yeah. Greenleaf, hybrid publisher. And so tell us a little bit about that experience working with Greenleaf versus working with a traditional publishing house.
Interesting. I mean, they're really diametrically opposed models. The mainstream publishing house will have, in my experience, had a sort of point of view. It was Random House, and they had sort of a point of view of what they wanted the book to be, and, influence the editorial process in a more meaningful way, I would say. Like they had a sort of vision. I'm not talking about like dotting I's and crossing T's. I mean more the vision for the book. Whereas in the case of The Art of Selling Your Business, it was a little bit more me driving the vision for the book, if that makes sense. And that may just be me maturing a little bit as an author as well. Like I felt like I kind of knew what I wanted to say, and that was okay. So that was different. Interesting backstory about Built to Sell. I'm like forgetting the whole story, but it's worth repeating that Built to Sell was first self-published. When I first did that book, it was self-published. I published it, in a very, like literally self-published, like, I didn't have a hybrid publisher or one of these kind of publishing houses. Like I was the one like negotiating with Amazon to list it on there. It was like, And a guy named Bo Burlingham is a wonderful author. I don't know if you're sure you've ever had him on the show, but he was the author of Small Giants, wrote A Stake in the Outcome with Jack Stack and The Great Game of Business. I mean, he's a prolific author. He got a copy of it, and he spontaneously wrote me a letter saying, "I love this book. I think it needs a bigger audience. I think you should get it published." And I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yep." And so he put me in touch with his agent, and his agent took me on. And anyways, she sold it to Random House.
Oh, that's great. So then when Random House picked it up, did they want to edit it or have you rewrite it or anything?
Yeah, they did. They wanted more content, of course, because once the book is sort of in the public domain, it's hard to sort of have a launch of a book that's already out there. So yeah, they wanted to add material to it. So we added a whole kind of implementation guide to the back of Built to Sell. So the original story, which is, I don't know, it's 30,000 words or 25,000 words or something like that, was the original Built to Sell book. So it was a fairly thin book, but then the Random House version of the book that you could get at the bookstore today, has an implementation guide, which is another maybe 20,000 words in the back that talks about, is not in parable form. It's like, okay, if you want to do this, here's what you need to go do. So it's not a parable, it's more of a how-to on the back of Built to Sell. That was the piece that Random House added, or I added in conjunction with Random House, that made it sort of a new book to publish.
Got it. I'm curious. I was meeting with a friend of mine who's a successful entrepreneur the other day, and we were talking about this business empire that he's growing and building. And he said, "I never want to sell my businesses." He said, "I want my businesses to last for 500 years. That's what I'm going for, is I'm trying to build an empire that lasts after me." And I thought, well, that's interesting. And yet, because I immediately, when he said, "I'm not building these to sell," I thought, well, gee, I wonder what John would have to say about this. And I thought, but it seems like building a business to sell, the stuff that you do to build a business that you can sell is the same stuff you would do if you were building that business to keep, isn't it?
Absolutely. Because for it to be valuable to somebody else, it has to be built on a solid foundation, a foundation that's not dependent on you personally. And I think that's the essence of building to sell. And it gives you all the cards. Again, as I said in the beginning, you can sell it if you want, or you can continue to run it knowing that you're building a valuable asset. And I always talk about people, like, I said, "Do you open your 401k statement?" And they're like, "Yeah, of course I do." And I'm like, "Well, why do you do that? If you're not looking to retire, like, why do you open it up?" And of course, the answer is we all want to know that the value of our 401k is going up, even though we don't want to retire anytime soon. It's the same reason we look when somebody sells a house on the street. We're like, hey, what did they get for that house? And it's because you're curious about the value of your own home. It's natural. And I think for the same reason you want to have a company that's built to sell, it means that you're building an asset. And over time, as time goes on, as centuries goes on, in the case of your friend, he's building something that's valuable. The sad reality is that I think a lot of owners think they're building a valuable company. And again, I speak in very first person in this case. I went through this experience myself. They think they're building a valuable company, and they think, "Oh, I'll pay myself fairly at the end, or there'll be a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow because I'll build this great company and I'll sell it and then I'll make money." And the reality is that in many cases, that's not true. They don't end up selling their company, or they sell for a fraction of what they thought it was worth. And so that's really the sad kind of reality of it. So I would just encourage people to think about their business as an asset, whether you want to sell it or not. You want to build its value.
Yeah, exactly. So take us inside your writing process. When you were writing these books, what did that process look like? Did you work in the mornings or the evenings? Did you go hard and fast for a few weeks and get it out, or did it take you years? What did it look like, the actual process?
Yeah, I've got about 90 minutes of every day where I can string 2 or 3 words together. I can make reasonably intelligent sentences, and then I'm completely destroyed. So I don't even know my name by 3:00 in the afternoon. But the time between sort of 5:00 in the morning and say 7:00 in the morning, or 6 and 8, those are the sort of 2 hours that I can actually sort of think and hopefully write something intelligent. So I would get up in the morning before anybody else in the house was up, and I'd write really just with coffee. Like the only thing I could, like, I didn't check my email. I don't like, it's literally like hard coffee, like French roast, pressed coffee, and writing for probably 500 to 750 words ish. Every day, typical business book has 40,000 words. So it was, 10 weeks of, or let me say 100 days, I should say, probably of doing that would have gotten me to 40,000 words, something like that. And one of the things that I was told at some point, and I've always remembered this, is write to somebody, not to a segment, not to an audience, but literally to somebody. And so I picked my sister. My sister, at the time, she's since sold her business, but at the time she was running a company. I think she had, 7 or 8 employees. And I obviously knew her very, very well. And I knew also sort of what I think she was going through with her company. And so I wrote to her. And whenever I got stuck in the morning, in particular, when I was sort of hungover or trying to figure out how to get a few hundred words out that day, I'd write, "Dear Emma." Emma's the name of my sister. And that's what kind of got me going, is to pretend I was actually writing an email to my sister. And it would help me to sort of formulate what I was trying to say to her in a way that didn't sound overly condescending, because she'd slap me in the face if I ever, made her slap me, was condescending, but also drove home a point that I thought was important for her to hear. So it helped me find the right tone, which wasn't overly prescriptive, like do this, do that. And it wasn't overly clinical or academic, but hopefully it's still not super superficial either. It had some meaning to the stuff. So that was my process. It was my Dear Emma letters.
So that was the first book. Did you write to Emma for the second and third books as well?
And the third. Yeah.
That's great. So you worked in the mornings, you wrote to a specific person. What were some of the lessons you learned along the way from these 3 books? What progress was there? If you went back to write Built to Sell again, what would you do differently?
Great question. Not much in the case of Built to Sell. I feel like it was, I think there was an emotional vein that went through Built to Sell, which I liked, and I wasn't editing myself all the way along, I can't say that, or how's that going to play with some people, or what about this? And whereas I think the automatic customer, the mistake I made there is I was sort of half pregnant. I wanted the book, with the kind of subscription universe, there are all these sort of software companies that use subscription billing models. And there's a whole raft of people who are super smart, uber smart around SaaS companies and multiples and everything to do with SaaS companies. And so there's a very deep, knowledgeable audience out there who understands metrics in a SaaS business, software as a service business, which is a recurring revenue model company. And then there's the plumber and the electrician and the construction guy or gal who wants to build some recurring revenue. And I tried to serve both masters. I tried to make it legit, credible in the eyes of a SaaS founder, while at the same time being readable by an electrician. And I think it was a mistake. If I had it to do over again, I think I would pick one of those audiences to write to. I think I just kept, as much as I was getting into the details of how recurring revenue models were valued and designed and so forth, I kept wanting to sound smarter than I was or am. In an effort to do that, it just didn't sound genuine in a way. So if I had a do-over, I probably have the automatic customer as a do-over, in particular around that picking an audience and not trying to serve 2 masters.
That's an interesting insight. And yeah, I could see you writing that book. I mean, you could really split it into 2 books. You could have the automatic customer for SaaS businesses. You could write a different version of the automatic customer for plumbers and all these other people who they still have recurring revenue. They can still look for subscriptions, but it's a very different type of business. So now, do you have other books that are planned out for the future? Other ideas you have to write about?
No, I mean, I think that so we're thinking of this as a trilogy, right? Built to Sell, how do you create a valuable company? got them at a customer, how do you accelerate the value of that company through recurring revenue? And then the art of selling your business, how do you harvest the value of your company? And to me, that's it. That's all I got, man. I don't have anything more to say on the topic. I might write some fiction, and I mean that seriously. Like when I retire, quote unquote, I might write some fiction, because I do actually enjoy the process of writing. Like it's not hard. Like when I'm doing fiction, I find writing nonfiction, like trying to source, what did they say? And was it like, what were the words? And when all that, I can't stand. And the details of writing, I find so meticulous. And that's one thing I would say to authors. And you think, oh, well, if you have a publisher, you'll have a fact checker and you'll have editors. Yeah, but still a lot of that I have found comes down to you, because your name's on the tin, like your name's on this book, right? And ultimately your editor is going to say, like, ultimately they're going to, it's your work in the public domain. And once you publish something, it becomes permanent. And so the need to fact check and get all the details right, if you're going to write a nonfiction book, is really, really high, because once it's out there, and you're going to look like an idiot if you get a fundamental mistake wrong. And so that always haunted me writing nonfiction. It's always haunted me and continues to haunt me. And that's with lots of people checking my work. It's still, at the end of the day, they're not going to be made to look like a fool if I said something wrong, or I got the wrong date, or I sourced the wrong person. I will, because it's my name on the tin. And that always left me, and it continues to leave me, finding the process of writing frustrating in that regard, because there is a lot of details associated with it. So I might write fiction because I don't want to deal with the details. Like, I want to write a story, but I don't give a shit about getting all the details right.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, thanks, John, for being on the show here today. If people want to connect with you and learn more about you and what Value Builder does, where's the best place for them to connect with you?
Well, we've actually put together like a unique page on our website, builttosell.com/published. And that's where your listeners can go. They can download the videos that describe the drivers of value at a company. There's a workbook that we created that accompanies the art of selling your business that they can get. And there's also the 9 subscription model workbook, a kind of checklist. It's all free. So it's just builttosell.com and then /published.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, great to have you today on the show, John. Appreciate it.
Hey, Josh, it was good to be with you.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.